Vincent Chambers is a professor of K-12 educational administration and also the Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the College of Education at Michigan State University. She's the author of Racial Opportunity Costs, the Toll of Academic Success on Black and Latinx Students. Hi, Tara. Next slide. Jeff Duncan Andrade is professor of Latinas and Latino Studies and Race and Resistance Studies at San Francisco State University. He is the author of Equality or Equity Toward a Model of Community Responsive Education. Next up is Nicole Joseph. Nicole is associate professor in the Department of Teaching and Learning at Vanderbilt University. She's also the director of the Joseph Mathematics Education Research Lab and the author of Making Black Girls Count in Math Education, a Black feminist vision for transformative teaching. And Tori Wynn is assistant professor of teaching and education in the School of Education at UC Davis and the co-founder and executive director of the Transformative Justice in Education Center. He is the co-editor of Restorative Justice in Education, Transforming Teaching and Learning Through the Disciplines. So welcome, everyone. We are so honored to have you all here. We can really dig into our topic today. To get us started, we thought we would really focus on three key questions. So what is the experience of students of color in our public schools? Two, what changes could we be making in our public schools that would be most impactful in improving the experiences of those students? And then three, who is in the best position to implement those changes? And are there examples of places where changes are really happening? So we'll launch into those questions. We'll have a few minutes at the end of the whole session to address questions from you. So please put your questions in the Q&A as we go through whenever you want to, and we will get to as many of them as we can at the end. Let's start with this question of what is the experience of students of color in our public schools now? Tori, would you be willing to kick us off?
Yes, Jessica. So thank you for the introductions. Thank you to my colleagues here. And also thank you for everyone zooming in today. That first question is loaded because when we think about the current experiences of our students, the experiences vary depending on where you live and what schools you go to. But when I think about the current experience of our students, I think for some students it's anti-Black, it's anti-other, it's anti-intellectual, and a persistence of marginalization. Students of color, especially African-American or Black students, are not treated today any better than yesterday. We all know the story of Ruby Bridges and the Little Rock Nine. But when I woke up this morning, 6 a.m. West Coast time, I read an article about a sixth grade student from Upland, California, receiving 3 drawings from that student's classmate. And the first was a picture of someone hanging from a tree. The second was a picture of cotton with the words, "My favorite cotton picker." And then the third picture was a picture of a monkey with the words, "You are my favorite monkey." That happened just a couple of days ago. That was how students in Upland would celebrate Black History Month. And then just last week, since we're talking about the current experiences of students of color, students in Philly made a racist video about Black History Month. And in the video, a girl was seen spray painting another student's face Black. And the girl said, "You're a Black girl, you know your roots, it's February, you're not nothing but a slave." And there, after that, "She's doing my laundry." And students from that school could be heard laughing about the video. And then anti-intellectual, we have a governor in Florida. We can't forget Florida, what's going on. The governors wanted to do away with anything being Black, intelligent, and accomplish the elimination of African-American. AP exam is not only based in racism, but it's also rooted in anti-intellectual. For the governor basically saying Black folk and their histories, how dare you be considered intelligent. And then the last thing I want to say, there's this emergence of homeschooling. And what I get from the emergence of homeschooling with Black folk is that Black folks are tired of being marginalized within our schools and the anti-intellectual that's going on. And amid all this, for some of our students' experiences, there are teachers that are creating restorative, engaging, transformative, healing, and joyful learning environments. These teachers love up on our students. They make learning fun for our kids. And I just want to emphasize there are school districts and teachers that are ensuring that the educational needs for our students and their aspirations are a priority. But let's not forget the reality for a lot of our students is happening every day and it's part of our history. And so, that's what when I think about the current experience of our students, I think about the present and the past. Some of it is negative, but hopefully today we can talk about some positive things going on.
Does anyone else want to share sort of their observations on the current experience?
Dr. Nguyen hit very important issues that I was also thinking about. It makes me wonder, why do we have to wait for educators to care about our kids? And when they're being dehumanized, marginalized every single day, as he just pointed out, examples. At the same time, I do want to elevate teachers that are resisting, that are creating curricular experiences that are helping Black and Latinx students to understand that they're strong, that they can learn, that they are highly intellectual and intelligent. Those teachers need to be celebrated, elevated, paid more, because that's, it's challenging work. You're fighting against a system that's over 400 years old. And those teachers are showing up every single day. And I just want to give a shout out to every teacher in this country that is doing that work to uplift Black and brown children.
Tara, I know that you have thought a lot about this sort of the historical and institutional structure, and Tori, in your book, you have a whole chapter on why history matters. The context and the history of institutional failure and divisiveness is so significant in where we are today. And how can individual teachers overcome that huge legacy of history?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Can you hear me okay? I was having an
Yep.
internet stability issue a second ago. I'm not sure what's going on. But anyway, first let me just thank the press for putting this panel together and for the invite to participate. And I also feel it important to say, I just want to hold space for my Michigan State family. We're just trying to hold space. We're trying to make sense of the unimaginable right now. So I would just ask, whoever you are, wherever you are, I call on you to demand gun control from your elected leaders. If I can even remember the question. So I consider myself a student of history. I have Dr. James Anderson and the other folks at my graduate alma mater, the University of Illinois, to thank for that. But one thing that I've learned is that what is in front of us, so to speak, is very rarely the full story. So one thing that has been important in my work is connecting the current experience of students of color to historical and institutional issues, particularly the impact of segregation and desegregation, the legacy of those issues. And they may seem very far away in time, but they aren't in terms of what happens in schools today. So, and if you have no idea what I just said meant, you've got some reading to do. But also, just to answer the question directly in terms of the current experience of students of color with respect to my work, I want to disrupt the notion that when it comes to these Black and Latinx students who are doing well in school, taking AP classes, earning top grades, that everything is fine. That is not necessarily true. When we peel back the layer, we understand that these students are operating within a very complex system that gives rigid messages about what is right with respect to how they should behave or speak or dress if they want to be seen as smart. And those messages have implications not only for their academic work directly, but also for related aspects of their experiences, like their relationships with their teachers or their peers and their family. And unfortunately, many of those messages have nothing to do with actual academic success, but do have real implications for who they are, for the people and things they care about. And we make assumptions that these kids are okay, but that is a false and dangerous assumption that we make about kids today in schools.
Yeah. Jeff, you are teaching kids in schools. You are like the road warrior with actually feet on the ground teaching. What's your experience been?
Well, I'm very much in agreement with what the three panelists before me have already said. I think what's striking to me is that when folks tell the stories that Tori just told, pulling from today's headlines, and they'll be the same headlines tomorrow. What's a little frustrating to me is the kind of false innocence that comes along, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. And I until we get to the place where white folks and people in power are as angry and disillusioned as Black and Indigenous and poor people have been from the outset of this public school project in this nation, then we'll continue to have to lift up things that folks of color know are happening to us every single day. That's just the stuff that made it into the headlines, right? Like this is happening all over, communities, tip to finish, edge to edge, West Coast, East Coast, Midwest. So until we, this nation has a real allergy to truth telling, and schools, regularly reflect that in the way in which they operate. And until we get to a place where we're willing to tell the truth, not just about where we are, but about the historical legacies that have put us in this position, then we're just playing games here, right? We're going to keep, shoving up these headlines and acting shocked. And what I really appreciate about young people is the ways in which they show a courage that I often find absent in grown folks, which is the willingness to just tell the damn truth, right? Like, and I think grown folks and in schools, we really try to sanitize it. And it's that the sanitizing of the reality, not only of our young people, but of the historical conditions that created those realities of our young people, that is getting in the way of us actually moving towards the rhetorical promise of a truly pluralistic multiracial democracy. And instead, all you have to do is look at the data. Like I'm not interested in having a debate about where we are right now. Anybody that wants to debate these things is an ideologue, right? The definition of a debate is that you have two meaningful, logical, well-supported arguments on one side, on each side of an issue. And you come together to have a debate so that you can figure out which of those arguments actually makes the most sense. And, I'm in schools all the time at every level, like on the ground with young people and teachers and, talking to superintendents and policymakers. And to a person, right, everybody's talking about being data-driven and research-based, which I think is fantastic. Like, okay, cool, yes, let's be data-driven and research-based. And what does the data tell us, right? The data tells us that what we are doing doesn't need to be tweaked. It is foundationally and fundamentally flawed. And the research as my colleagues here mentioned, like there are tremendous examples of educators every day that are, in spite of the system, incredibly disruptive, right? And healing and medicinal for our young people. And so if we are honest about the data, we know that what needs to happen is not a soft pivot. Like it's a foundational, fundamental rethink about the very purpose of public schools in this society. And why I remain eminently hopeful is because I'm so frequently around young people that are willing to have honest, direct, and truthful conversations about what that could actually look like. And because I'm a researcher that gets to spend time with brilliant people like the folks on this panel that actually have answers, right? We keep acting like we don't know what to do, when in fact we do know what to do. But the will has to precede the skill. And we have a national crisis of will, which is getting in the way of us actually skilling up the folks that are with our babies every day. The last thing I'll say is that where I am deeply frustrated is I feel like and felt like we had a real opportunity coming back out of COVID for the fundamental rethink. And the more I'm in schools, the more I see this deep commitment to a return to business as usual. And I think that is in large part due to the fact that coming out of COVID, we weren't willing to really tell the truth about where we were before we went into COVID, where we were during COVID, and where we're actually headed now that we've quote unquote come back from the pandemic.
Can I tie that back to, like, you made this statement about a crisis of will, and I think that is a crux of this issue. There is this politicization of the school curriculum and what's going on in schools, and that obviously has a significant impact on students. How do you translate this crisis of will into a way of combating this politicization that we're seeing of issues related to schools, the politicization of the funding of educational resources, of programs, of change that could be happening as a result of COVID?
Well, look, first of all, I feel like I want to correct that statement a little bit, because the only time that schools, that there's a politicization of schools is when people of color and poor folks start demanding some stuff, right? Schools at their outset were highly political. Everything that is currently normal in school is highly politicized, right? So what's happening, right, is that folks of color and folks that have been largely locked out of that political process for determining what our babies actually have to learn, right? How our babies have to actually spend our time. Now that those voices are emerging collectively, right? And it's not an individual parent showing up and demanding justice for their child from the principal, right? It's a collective body that's actually supported by heaps of research, decades of research, and excellent practice. And now it's political, right? So, which is fine, because it's always been political, right? But again, this is going back to our unwillingness to tell the truth about what's always been going on. The fact that what's been going on is not working for huge cross sections of the young people in this country, not just students of color, right? For white kids too, and an unwillingness to revisit the core fundamental question about why are we doing this? Why do we take children away from their families by law for 13 consecutive years for 7 hours a day? Why do we do that? And I just love for us to have local and national serious conversations to try to answer that question. And yes, it would be political. And I'm okay with that. I'm not sure there's any way to depoliticize it, right? But to be honest about the fact that this is a political conversation, and one that the politics of the nation needs to take much more seriously.
I want to disagree with Jeff briefly, but it's a disagreement to agree, because when you said the data was flawed, and we're going to take it to some youngsters. I remember conducting the research, and one of the youth who happened to be from Chicago but relocated to another city basically told me the system was working just fine. He said the numbers that we see in the data, suspension rates, me not going to school, same thing happened to my parents. So the system is working just fine. And I was shocked because he was able to critically analyze what was going on in the school district. So in other words, the system is working the way it's designed to work if we think about it according to the youth. Then in 1979, James Baldwin at Berkeley said, the schools are not working, so let's take our kids out of the school. We know that our kids have to go to school. Pedro Nogueira, who wrote his book about it's important for our kids to go to school because majority of our kids have to be in these schools. But basically what James Baldwin said, that the school system is $1 billion industry and they don't want to educate our kids, right? So the data is going to continue to be, 10 years from now, this same panel with different people will be having the same conversation. But today, what we do know is that we're going to talk about ideas that from history into current that may offer solutions, but the system is working the way the system was designed from day one, and we are constantly fighting against the system. And our research is always an uphill battle. And what we're doing today is no different from what the folks did in the 1970s. So the data is flawed, but it's working for certain people.
So that is the perfect segue to the next question, which is, what changes can we make to our system? So the system's working the way it was designed to, but it's not working for this huge segment of the population, for students of color. What can we change? What would be impactful? Nicole, do you want to start us off?
I mean, when I think about the historical piece is significant, so you all might have to help me, but the Ocean Hill, I think this was in the 1960s, in Brownsville, New York, where African-American communities were having these conversations about changing curriculum and wanting and pushing for African-American, more African-American history and just a more relevant, curriculum. And so, those communities were coming together and pushing for change. And I think that today in 2023, you have a lot more African-American communities that have way more resources, way more time. And I just feel like that's something that's a place where we could start, because they're never gonna, like Jeff said, they're never gonna do what they need to do as a system to educate, I think, African-American and Latinx children. Like, it's just not gonna happen. And that was one of the reasons why historically Black colleges and Hispanic serving institutions, began to uprise when they did, because they didn't want us in their schools. And so Black folks are always going to figure out a way to educate, its own population. And, I don't know how popular that idea is. And I'm not at all suggesting like separatism. So let's make that clear. I'm just saying that we can't depend on the system if we're thinking about like a critical mass and I think communities are going to have to do this work, and hopefully they can do this work by bridge building, because not all Black folks, it's not a monolithic Black person, right, or community. So hopefully we can build across those coalitions to establish a more democratic agenda for marginalized kids.
Tara, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I'm back in 1935 with W.E.B. Du Bois's treatise in the Journal of Negro Education. Does the Negro need separate schools? Like, way back then, he's talking about, you know, whether, and if you haven't read that piece, go get it right now. But whether, you know, the US public education system is even set up to educate our children. And that he makes the point, I'm not making the point is not whether segregated schools or desegregated schools. That's not the point. The point is whether, you know, like our children need an education, and whether, you know, a white norm educational system can do that, he questions. So go get that piece. But I'm of two minds about the question that you posed, Jessica. On the one hand, you know, real significant change can and does happen every day. All of us on this panel can share examples, or teachers or classrooms or schools or communities where racially minoritized students are thriving. And we've already heard some of those stories today. And we also have examples of historical periods, especially, I mean, the civil rights movement, where we began to see systemic change as a result of collaboration among community activists and, you know, legislative, judicial, executive branches of government. So we see that, right? And I don't think any of us, Jeff said, I don't think we could do this work if we didn't have a fundamental optimism or belief that change is possible. However, on the other hand, racism is real. Critical race theory was born out of the disappointment of civil rights era wins not leading to more lasting change. And so we can do localized and temporary change, but that systemic lasting change has been elusive because of how difficult it is to disrupt those white supremacist logics. History has taught us that too. And so you know, that's the tension for me, but I don't let go of that optimism, that because I, you know, like I spend time in schools too, and I see these kids, I see their spirit, and you can't help but know that the future is bright. You know, and so it's about making sense of that tension of both sides of that coin, I guess, for me anyway.
Other thoughts, Jeff?
Yeah, I think in my most recent book, I'm really quite clear and candid about what I think needs to happen and the potential of it, and the existing body of research that clearly supports it as a meaningful movement for schools, and that is to say that it is my position, is the position of the school that we launched in our own community, that schools need to make a singular promise to families. And this really became, you know, as a high school teacher for a long time. And when you're a high school teacher, you know, parents don't bring high school kids to the doorstep and hand them off, right? That just ain't happening with a 16-year-old, right? So when we opened our school, we opened an elementary school. So on the first day, there's all these parents, several of whom were my former students, literally bringing their babies, right, these 6-year-olds, to the doorstep of the school, and I'm watching them walk these babies up to us, and hand them off to us, and then turn their backs and walk away. And I was like, damn, this is so deep, like what's happening, right? Just drop off at elementary school is so deep to me. And via that, you know, we're in our 8th year now, and I've learned so many things, but one of the things that I've learned is the importance of a singular promise, which is that when you give us your babies, our singular promise to you is that when you come back 7 hours later, that they will be more well than when you drop them off. Punto. That's it, right? That's and of course, like, you know, I've been teaching almost 30 years. I know that's impossible. I have twin boys. I can't even do it with my two, right, every day. But I don't think that's actually what we want as parents. What we want is the promise that my baby's going to be more well for their 7 hours with you, which I don't even actually have a choice about. Like I'm mandated by law to bring them to one of these institutions or start my own, right? So I know you're going to miss sometimes. I missed constantly as an educator, but I think what our families want is not perfection, but a promise. And the promise being that when you miss, that you will atone, you will own it, right? That I missed with your baby today. And atonement is different than apologizing, which is what I think our schools teach, right? Our schools teach our babies to say, I'm sorry, right? But what our communities teach is sorry ain't enough. Sorry is important. You got to say sorry and you got to make it right, right? And that's what schools don't do. They rarely say sorry, and they even more rarely atone. So the direction that I feel like the discussion, and I totally agree. I think it was Nicole was saying that like this really needs to be local work, right? I think one of the mistakes we've made in thinking about how do we reshape, reform schools has been that we've done it at the 10,000 foot level. Like all of the schools in the district are going to do this. All the schools in the district are going to do that. And I think that what we've learned in places where we are seeing traction, and in some of these spaces where Black and brown children and children in poverty are actually experiencing a meaningful, well education, is that it's been more localized, right? And so thus the term community responsive, that yes, I want cultural responsivity, but you can't be community responsive without being culturally responsive. And so situating deeper conversations, getting, as Brian Stevenson said, getting proximity to the pain that young people and families that we are serving in schools are actually experiencing. And then thinking about what is that reality? What do those conversations mean for the kinds of shifts and changes we need to make in this school to centralize and foundationalize the project of wellness? Because we know absolutely in the neuroscience, in social epidemiology, in public health, in psychology, we know with absolute certainty that the child that is not well is going to consistently struggle to show up full self, meaningful ways in any kind of social setting, but particularly a classroom setting that is deeply committed to controlling their body. So if we really are serious about the project of literacy, numeracy, right, then we know that the lead data that we have to pay attention to is the data about how well the child is. Because when the child is well, the lag data, which is test scores, all these other things that schools are currently measuring, they start taking care of themselves. But in most of the schools that are serving our communities, wellness is at best an afterthought, right? It's a side project. It's something that the teacher isn't responsible for. They send them to the wellness coordinator or the restorative justice coordinator or whatever, and get this child ready and then send them back to me, and then I'll be able to teach them. So I think there has to be a real rethink, back to my other comments, about the purpose. And if the purpose is wellness, then what teachers and school leaders are doing on a day-to-day basis is going to look fundamentally different.
So I think that what you're drawing us toward, Jeff, is when you talk about wellness and individual student wellness and the wellness of the student community within a school, is taking this all down to the level of the student. And Nicole also has said, like, we need to make this about the kids, not the adults. And I see, just skimming the Q&A, that there are lots of questions people have about how we make this practical. What can individual communities do to create a supportive environment, and an environment where we're reducing those inequities and giving every kid a chance? What can individual communities do? What can individual teachers do with their classrooms? So taking this all the way back from the system to the individual classroom, what are some strategies?
Yeah, I think Jeff mentioned community and being localized, like Nicole said, and Tara being a historian. I think we need to uplift of Vanessa Siddle Walker's work, Their Highest Potential, because in her book, she talks about the whole child and every child. And this was during the segregated South. And as she writes about these teachers, they were trained or received their teaching credentials at HBCUs, then they came back to their community. So they were not only instructors inside the classroom, but they also were members of the community and they cared about their kids. And so they were able to focus in on the whole child and every child. And so I think that's very, very important. Is we can look and we can think of ideas, but it's right in front of us. If we take her book, Their Highest Potential, and we think about the local community and how those teachers lived within those communities. I remember, Jeff, I showed one of your clippings of you talking about teaching at the high school and living in the high school and being able to connect with the students. You know, what does that mean to see your teachers? So that's one example is the whole child and every child. And I think also one of the things we're forgetting too is our teacher ed programs. A lot of our teachers are coming out of our teacher ed programs and not receiving the type of education they need to educate our kids. So our teacher ed programs need to be redesigned. Mariana Sotomani and I, we wrote a piece basically calling for teachers to take up the oath as doctors and attorneys take. And so this goes to what Jeff mentioned earlier. How can we promise our families and our parents and the parents that our kids are going to be in good hands? So if our teachers can take an oath, I don't know what's written in the oath, it may be 10 things, but if they can take an oath to make sure that they suspend the harm and make sure that they decenter whiteness, that is an important step for us to really start changing the system. And so if we think about what teachers can do, you know, they need to figure out ways to engage in their communities.
Is there a way for teachers to, how do teachers create that sense of trust within a classroom that really gives all of the students the feeling that they belong and that they are part of the conversation, that their voices matter? How does a teacher build that trust?
They first, excuse me, they first have to relinquish power and actually have real conversations with students. The only way that I think a teacher is going to gain the respect and authentic relationship with students that have been historically, underserved is you have to start by listening. So, when you ask, like, what can teachers do? At my talk that I gave at the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, I basically went down a list. I mean, I was a math teacher for a very long time before I became a professor. One thing is stop using worksheets as the main activity for teaching mathematics to Black and Brown children. Get rid of the worksheets. Now, let's be clear. I'm not saying that worksheets are terrible in and of themselves, but when they are the main thing that, that kids are using, and there's not an opportunity to do math projects, to talk about the mathematics, to collaborate, to share ideas, that's a problem. That's an anti-intellectual environment in mathematics, right? And so the other thing is, because my specialty are Black girls, is disrupt the stereotypes and push back on the stereotypes that Black girls are too loud, that they're, fast, that you're criminalizing them. And those are everyday, regular things that a teacher can do starting on Monday. You don't have to wait for professional development to start doing that, right? And so those teachers have to be willing to set and make those commitments. And I write about this in my book. It's called A Talk to Teachers, and it is inspired by James Baldwin. And basically, I'm like, this is for teachers who are saying, I'm not coming with excuses, but I want to know, what can I do to support my Black girls in learning mathematics deeply, conceptually, at high levels? Oh, thank you. Like, how do I do that? And my colleague, Lawrence said teacher education. The thing is that we gotta, who's teaching those pre-service teachers? if you have white professors that haven't done the work of interrogating systems and oppression, how are they going to model and teach pre-service teachers to do that work, right? So then you're opening up a whole nother can of worms of like, faculty not having critically conscious faculty that can actually do the work. But that's the work of all of us, right? We have to interrogate systems. We have to interrogate our own biases because we all bring them. And we have to interrogate, these prejudices and things that we have. And, I'm going to be student, like, I'm going to believe in the student every single time. And so if we can just begin to close our lips, give students room to tell us how to support them, and really be authentic about that, you'll see some change. I'm gonna be quiet and let my colleagues jump in.
I love that, like the get rid of worksheets. That is something that I could walk into class on Monday morning and say they are gone. And I think that's a lot of our participants here are looking for that kind, like what can I actually do starting Monday to make a difference in the lives of the kids in my classroom? I would love to hear if you all have other suggestions like that, just boots on the ground.
I remember being at UW-Madison receiving my PhD, and right after Trayvon Martin was murdered, Gloria Lasser-Billings started a class with a check-in and making sure that all the students was able to share how they felt. I never forget that moment. And that's when I knew Gloria Lasser-Billings was different, because the same day I had 2 other classes, and those professors started the classes just like nothing happened, and just went in, and I was shocked. And as an educator, check in with your students, right? Restorative justice, as a practitioner and who believes in restorative justice, we create opportunities within the day of the school to have students check in, and it can be a 5-minute check-in, because a lot of our students, not only students of color, because a lot of white students that attend some of the best independent schools, they practice restorative justice and they have check-ins because they also know that these students need to be checking in. So in addition to getting rid of the worksheets, check in with your students, because there's things that happen locally. There's opportunities to celebrate with the students, but also some of the students have a lot going on, and you need to check in with the students.
I think one of the things that I often recommend to teachers that are trying to figure out where to start is to ask young people, ask your students, who's the dopest teacher you've ever had? And I mean, like, not in this school, I mean, like, ever. Dopest teacher ever. Might have been kinder, right? And then go find that person, right? There's seeing is believing. And I think that there's too little time for educators to be present in the practice of other educators that are doing the deed already. And so it's such an isolating profession. And, I've been at this a long time, and there are times when I get stuck. And when I get stuck, there's my 2 sources of liberation to get back to the teacher that I really always wanted to be are the young people, as Tori was just saying, as Nicole was saying, as Tara said earlier, right? And other dope educators. And so that's zero cost, right? You can go, right, and start building that relationship. Surround yourself with other really committed educators. And the one thing teachers like to do is teach. So teachers that are teaching young people also want to be teachers of teachers. But there's so little professionalization of the folks that are on the ground that actually have answers, in part because of the very way we've structured schools. And it doesn't need to be that way. The other thing that I want to see teachers do is to look yourself in the mirror and have a conversation with your ancestors, and really get to a question, not about teacher small t, That's a job. I'm talking about teacher big T, like your abuelita, like your grandma, that teacher, right? That's the overwhelming majority of teachers that I'm around. That's who they wanted to be when they got in the gig, right? They wanted to be teacher big T. And then they ended up teacher small t because they found themselves inside of an institutional politic. So go get in the mirror, right? Have a regular check-in with your ancestors about who you want to be as a teacher, that the purpose question. And understand that, Confucius said many paths all leading home. Other scholars have said that, Emerson wrote, imitation is always suicide. So the goal isn't to be like Gloria Ladson Billings, as much as I would love to be like Gloria Ladson Billings because she is so dope, right? But being around great teachers isn't about copying them, right? It's about being around that energy and understanding that you have that same capacity. Like you can't be Gloria Ladson Billings, right? So you shouldn't want to be Gloria Ladson Billings, right? You should want to be your version of that greatness. But you can't really do that if you don't have that conversation with yourself and be committed to digging where you stand. It's not outside of you, right? It's right there. Pick up the damn shovel and start digging and ask yourself questions like, why do I want these babies to read? Why do I want them to write? Why do I want them to study math? Why do I want them to learn science? And think about how you define success for our babies. And if it's a college and career pathway, bounce. Yes, I want my sons to go to college. Yes, I want my sons to have a career, right? But I don't give a damn if my children are in the 90th percentile in reading and writing and they're not well, right? I want my sons to love themselves. And I want them to love themselves for the color of their skin, the language they speak, the neighborhood they're from, who their ancestors are. And because I know if that happens, the reading, the writing, the math, the test score, they're all going to take care of themselves when it's time. But too many of our babies, especially Black and Indigenous and brown babies, leave our school system after all those years hating themselves. And that is intolerable to me. It is unacceptable, and it is the essence, as Tori said, of the colonial project, showing that this system is doing exactly what it's designed to do, right? And none of y'all on this call have to be down with that project. I don't care who your principal is. I don't care who your superintendent is. I don't care what your state boundaries are. When you get inside that classroom with those babies, you can be who you want to be. And if you can't be who you really need to be with our babies, change schools. Go where you can be the teacher that you signed up to be. And don't let anybody stand in the way of that. And yeah, it's going to be hard, but you got 4 homies right here on this call that are down to support you with that in any way that we can.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Yeah, I think as you were talking, I was thinking about the support of the community that it takes, that everybody, students need the support of their teachers, teachers need the support of their communities. And you talked a lot about metrics and measuring, and grades isn't a true reflection. Tara, you made that point. Grades aren't a true reflection of what your students know, what they're capable of, who they are, what their capabilities are. How can you, if you are really embarking as a teacher on this journey to change and make a difference in the lives of your students, how do you know if you've succeeded? What are you looking for in your classroom? Because grades aren't the measure. Tara, do you have thoughts about that? Because I know you've thought a lot about the grades issue. It's not the grades. What should teachers be looking for?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, one of the things that I care a lot about is, like my book is about high achieving Black and Latinx students. And one of the things that I try to reframe is the idea of high achieving. Yes, I'm talking about students who have been successful in terms of those traditional metrics, but I don't just mean those students, because we all know these kids who are absolutely capable. of doing all of those things and are making the absolute rational decision to opt out of this system because it is toxic, because it is destructive, because it is not a healthy thing for them to do, because we have set up academic success to be so limiting for them that it is in an unhealthy choice for them to pursue academic success in this way. And so I'm using these traditionally successful students not to put a spotlight on them, but to say, if we can understand their experiences and better understand the costs of their success, it helps us understand all of these students and the choices that they are making. And so I think the comments that Jeff just made really speak to that issue too, around, I want my child to leave school being whole and healthy and well. And too often we are looking at these objective measures. Well, I think we make subjective measures of academic success, how you speak, how you dress, how you behave, and pretend like those are objective measures of success when they're not, right? And we can argue about grades and test scores, those are not objective either, but what are we really looking at in terms of wellness? If we really looked at what takes a student, what is success, those are the kinds of things. I also wanted to speak to this issue of, what we're looking for in terms of teachers. My son I never had a teacher of color my whole K-12 experience. But my son has had 3 incredible Black women teachers. He's 11. And the standout teacher for him was a white male teacher. And what stood out for him, and he had that teacher during COVID, so he was at home and I could hear him, upstairs, he's upstairs now. I could hear his teacher. And what stood out for Langston about that experience with his teacher, Mr. Finger, was how focused Mr. Finger was on Langston as a person, not Langston's success on his reading benchmarks or math achievement or those kinds of things, but Mr. Finger's investment in Langston as a person. What are you interested in? What animates you as a person? What are you excited about? How can I key into who you are as a person and connect with you and get you excited about, what we're learning about next? And that to me is key. I don't care, like Jeff said, and what Nicole said, and Tori said, I don't care about your grades and test scores. I care about you, that you love learning. And if you love learning, the rest is going to come. That's what I care about.
Which just comes back to centering on wellness and individual, respecting the individual and honoring the individual and seeing the individual.
Can I just also add that I think it's important for us. I was like loving when Jeff said we don't want to tell the truth. Like, we need to engage in truth telling, but I think we also need to bring our children into the problem solving process. And I think this is what Jeff has been doing for the last 20 or so years, and help them understand, like teach them how to think about the problem. So metacognition, right? So being honest about, this is how our system has operated, right? And of course, you can develop appropriate language. And this is how I'm trying to change. So we're going back to like what a teacher can do in the classroom. And this is how I'm trying to change things. So one of those things is to create ways to inspire you, to create ways to get you excited so that you're running to my class. Create ways that make it, this is Goldie Muhammad, impossible for you to fail, right? Have those conversations and bring the students into those conversations, and they will help you figure those things out. And you are also elevating their voices. Like, just by having these conversations, you're telling them that what you say matters. What you say is going to inform my curriculum. What you say is going to inform the pedagogies and the interactions. It's going to help me change this class. And if you have those transparent metacognitive conversations with the kids, again, I can guarantee you that you're going to see change, because people kids aren't used to folks doing that. Now, they might give you some pushback because they've been in this system for a very long time. But again, keep trying and keep at it because I think your students will, our students will begin to respond positively once they see that, you know, you're not playing games, like you're serious about trying to find that inspiration and digging and mining the genius that's in every single child.
This has been such an amazing conversation, and all of you, I think, have classrooms that I would run to. And I think this sort of commitment to change is so important. And this is a conversation that clearly needs to continue and needs to happen in, you know, every corner of the country, every classroom in the country, to really lead us toward a better place for our students and for us. And for the future. Yes, hold up those books, Tara. That's awesome. Read these books, so many of these lessons can be shared through these kinds of titles that these, our panelists, our authors are writing. So thank you so much for all of your comments and your words of wisdom, and thank you to everybody who's attended. We're so glad you could be here, so grateful you could be here. And we will be following up with everybody who registered for this event. We'll provide a link to the recording so you can go back and listen more. We'll provide information for you about each of our panelists and their books, and also give you an opportunity to sign up and hear when we're doing more events like this. We really want to connect with you often and deeply in discussing what's important to our society. So thank you very much. Very grateful.